Well, hello and welcome to Newscentre. I'm Ashmit Kumar. Now, a constitution bench of the Supreme Court continued hearing same-sex marriage petitions for the sixth day today. Now, the government argued that courts cannot rewrite laws passed by the parliament as they can potentially affect personal laws like the Hindu Marriage Act. The Solicitor General further said that the right to love is a fundamental right, but legal recognition of union is not. The Chief Justice of India observed that if the duty of the state to recognize the social impact of cohabitation. CJI Justice Chandrachud also added that the murals in temples suggest that the LGBTQ relationships existed much before the Britishers colonized India. In fact, students from 36 Indian law schools have written an open letter to the Bar Council of India's opposition to legalizing same-sex marriage. And joining me now, in fact, to take this discussion forward are two students who are signatories to that very open letter that was out today on social media. Joining me now is Dhawal Mittal, student at the National Law School of India University in Bengaluru, and Ayan Garg, student at the National Law University in Delhi. Ayan, Dhawal, thank you so much for joining us. Ayan, let me come to you first. The first question I'd like to put across to you was the Bar Council's assertion that only 99.9% of the population appears to agree with legalizing same-sex marriage. The reason I make that the first question is that that is also the social media commentary on your social media handles that say that, look, these are very isolated pockets of support that are coming up. It's not really as widespread. What is your feeling on campus? Ayan.
Well, Ashmit, first of all, thank you so much for having us here. And to answer your question, I would say that first of all, the 99.9% statistic is out of nowhere, as we all know, and I think there's no need to reiterate that. Our own personal experience with this statement has been, we put this together in 3 days. And within 3 days, you see us putting together a statement which has representation from 36 law schools and many more endorsing the statement. So we would disagree. We would say these are not isolated pockets. Rather, how you define what is an isolated pocket and what is the mainstream really just reflects your biases. The kind of support that we've seen from across all kinds of law schools, all kinds of students, just shows us that this is really a national issue, that the people who are behind this issue are systematically silenced, which is why it's easy to call them isolated pockets. But yeah, that's what we would say.
Interesting take on that. Dhawal, let me come to you now. You are a law student at the NLU in Bengaluru. You're seeking to be a part of the bar, to be a part of that legal community. The question I then want to ask is, when you have the Bar Council of India, a statutory body that is meant for regulating the bar, when it makes such statements, does it then perhaps result in robbing you of your agency, or perhaps robbing other LGBTQ members of the bar of their agency?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having us, Ashmit. And on that, I think the Bar Council of India, as we have also pointed out in our statement, is a body populated entirely by cisgender men. So that also puts forward their own bias and a limited understanding of the larger viewpoint. And when something like this, a senior body in a profession that I someday want to be a part of, puts out a statement like this, it does feel a little bit alienated, and I do not have as much faith in the legal profession as I maybe did at the starting of my law school journey. But at the very same time, throughout this entire process of putting out this statement and seeing support from, as Ayan also pointed out, from 36 law schools across different parts of the country and across different types of background of these law schools, it does repose faith in the legal profession again. And I think that the Bar Council of India and their statement does reflect how unrepresentative the body is. But at the same time, we do see legal profession as something which is too formalistic, which is set in their ways. And maybe petitions like this, petitions like Navteej Singh Johar, petitions like Nalsa will push the legal community also to reform itself and also take on the role of being freedom fighters as we've had historically in India, and also being social justice warriors as we've had historically in India.
Interesting. Ayan, let's bring our attention focus back to the letter that you, as well as various other student members, have written and signed. The letter takes very strong exception to the language that has been used by the Bar Council. The language that has been used is to describe the spectrum of gender and sexuality as a social experiment, and goes on to call it morally compunctive. That is something that the letter is very particular on, that it is regressive from the Bar Council of India. Ayan.
Well, I would say that the Bar Council of India must understand that the statements that it makes have repercussions not only for the lawyers whom it regulates, but for the entire society. This is a body that the entire country looks up to, and when the body uses such language, it has a dehumanizing effect. We know that such hateful speech percolates in society quickly, and to see professionals using such language when they should be diplomatic, in fact, when their profession asks them to be diplomatic and neutral, is really quite disheartening. And I would further add that there's another side to this rhetoric, which is it is not indigenous. Contrary to their claims that gay marriage or queer love of any form is Western, or that queer love of any form does not belong to Indian society, it is really quite the opposite. We saw rhetoric like this coming from the Britishers when they came to our country. And when they realized that, look, here are forms of love that we do not understand, here are forms of love that we deem morally compunctive. It is really quite shameful to see the BCI continuing such rhetoric.
Sure. Let me take that across. In fact, borrowing from one of the points that you had made about how perhaps we're submissive to Victorian ideals and Victorian morality. The reason I make that remark is because that was the very observation that was made by the Chief Justice himself today, that it seems that we've bound ourselves with these Victorian morals post 1857, words from the Chief Justice himself. Let me take that across to Dhawal. Dhawal, is that something that you feel as a student on the ground? Perhaps there is a greater acceptance and greater degree of education and awareness about different genders and different sexualities. Do you see that on the ground in your campus when you speak to your colleagues?
Of course. So I think on campus, I think the best way to represent this is that our organization, NLS Queer Alliance itself, has 67 members on campus being a part of it. So at least on campus, we do have much more acceptance. We do have much more liberal and progressive ideas when people would come out and show support to the LGBTQ community. In Bangalore, specifically, there's the Namma Pride Parade, wherein a couple of buses from our own campus go and celebrate queer love. So the assertion by the BCI and the arguments in the court itself that LGBTIQ love is not that supported on the ground is actually reeking of their own lack of understanding of what the ground reality is. And if you really do visit any college campus, you will see much more acceptance than what is being said in the court.
Sure. Ayan, let me come to you now. Now we have a situation. It's one thing for the Bar Council of India to be making the kind of statements that it did over the weekend, but it's quite another for the entire weight of the government to be stacked up against you, where the government is making its position clear that it will bat hammer and tongs against same-sex marriage. As a member of the youth, as a prospective lawyer, as a student, is that intimidating for you? Is that nerve-wracking for you? Does that perhaps cause concern for you and cause anxiety?
The first time.
I would say absolutely. No, I would say that.
Ayan, to you first.
I would say that it absolutely does, because you have a government which is supposed to be representative in our constitutional setup. You have a government which is supposed to respect everybody's fundamental rights. And we unfortunately do not see that in the position being taken by the government in this case. At the same time, I would say that as anxious as it is, this experience of all law colleges across the country trying to join in some form, law students from across the country trying to join in some form, building this kind of community, building this kind of solidarity, reminds us that the ultimate power in our country, under our constitution, the ultimate sovereignty, is with people and is with the spirit of the constitution. And we truly fundamentally believe that the issue which is there in the court, integral to the constitution, is integral to our idea and spirit of the constitution. And so I believe that yes, it is anxious, of course, and we would like the government to change its stance to be fully representative. But at the same time, we know that our constitution drafters envision that when the government is not representative, that when there is governmental excess, there is always the spirit of the constitution, and there are always the defenders of the constitution to help people. So while we're anxious, yes, of course we are also not entirely anxious.
Sure. Dhawal, coming to you now, I'm sure as a student of law, you must be following the Constitution Bench proceedings that are underway. It affects you personally as well. Your quick take on what you make of the CJI, Chief Justice Chandrachud's observations. He's spoken about how gender is not an absolute, how it is fluid. He talks about how we are confining ourselves to Victorian models. He harks back to the days when we look at temples and we see the murals which recognize such different genders and different gender identities. Your quick take on these observations that fall from the bench, and particularly the Chief Justice.
I think it's very encouraging to see that the CGI has taken that stand wherein he is recognizing that there is a whole spectrum of gender identities and a whole spectrum of sexualities. But this also comes in the context of a couple of months ago, Advocate Rohin Bhatt had written a letter to the Supreme Court asking for gender-neutral bathrooms in the Supreme Court, which was implemented. So we do see a progressive stand from the Supreme Court at recognizing the different gender identities that exist and also the different sexualities that exist, which is only happening at this point because we had the judgment in Nalsa, which recognized the rights of transgender people as well. So when we look back at our own scriptures, when we look back at our own history across religions, we do see people exhibiting their gender in ways which might not conform to the binary that we have of man and woman right now. That binary was sort of ingrained into us by years of colonial repression, and also because of many other factors which may or may not have been related to the Victorian morality. But finally, after years of repression, the whole spectrum of gender identities is finding some sort of acceptance, some sort of acknowledgement in the Supreme Court. And I do wish that it is not restricted to just the Supreme Court and finds it acceptance, acknowledgement, and respect as well in the Parliament. And that's a day that we are all looking forward to.
Sure. Sure. Ayan, final question to you now. There seems to be a via media that seems to be talked about within the courtroom, which is that there perhaps may be a recognition of the right to cohabit, but may not get the tag of marriage. Will that satisfy the anxieties, the concerns that you have as a member of the LGBTQ community?
I would say that, of course, this is a comment that was just made today. I will say that the queer community is not a monolith. And it becomes important for us to realize that different members of the community have different needs. While there may be some for whom mere cohabitation and recognition of cohabitation will be okay, there might be some who have different demands, and for whom the rights, the derivative rights which marriage gives you, which is the right to hold property in each other's name and so forth, for whom those rights are more important because of other factors, right? So I will say that I, of course, cannot speak for the entire queer community, but whatever outcome that the Supreme Court gives, it must give it in the spirit of equality. And so if the Supreme Court is willing to give the queer community the same rights as married straight couples have under Indian law, then, well, what's in a name? But of course, my answer cannot represent the demands of the entire queer community, seeing how diverse it is.
Sure. Thank you, Ayan. Thank you, Dhawal, so much for joining us and sharing your take with us, of course, shedding more light on what the youth thinks about this conversation going forward. Again, that letter from Law University students coming out very strongly against the Bar Council of India resolution. With that, it's time now to slip into a very short break. But coming up, Etihad Airways completes 20 years of operations in India. My colleague Parishit Luthra speaks to the Etihad CEO on the company's plans for India. Stay tuned.